It's 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, and you're sitting in your car in an empty parking lot, 3 blocks from your parents' house, wearing a shirt with a company logo on it that doesn't exist anymore. Your phone buzzes. It's your mother. Are you at work? I made too much soup. I was going to drop some off at your office. Your heart does something strange in your chest. You haven't had an office in 14 months. I'm actually in a meeting off-site. I'll swing by after work, around 6. You type back. You put the phone down and just sit there, in a parking lot, in the middle of a Tuesday, with $4.3 million sitting quietly in a brokerage account that not a single person in your family knows exists. This is what it actually looks like to retire at 35. Not yachts, not champagne. A parking lot, a lie about soup, and a level of secrecy most people can't even imagine maintaining for a single week, let alone years. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how you got here, why you're hiding it, and what happens the day it almost falls apart. Rewind 11 years. You were 24, working a job that paid decently but not spectacularly, living in a city where rent ate a third of your paycheck before you'd even bought groceries. Nothing about your life looked unusual. You were, by every visible measure, completely ordinary. But you'd read something at 22 that rewired how you thought about money. A blog, then a forum, then a whole online community built around a single, almost absurd idea that if you saved aggressively enough, invested consistently enough, and lived quietly enough, you could stop needing a paycheck decades before anyone expected you to. You didn't tell anyone. Not your roommate, not your parents, not the girl you were dating at the time. You just started living slightly below what your income allowed and funneling the difference into index funds month after month without fanfare. Nobody noticed at first because there was nothing to notice. You still went to happy hours, you still bought birthday gifts. You just skipped the car upgrade, the bigger apartment, the vacations that would have shown up in photos. You optimized in the places nobody was watching and spent normally in the places everyone was. By 27, you had 6 figures invested. By 30, it had compounded past $1 million, helped along by a market that in hindsight was unusually kind to you during exactly the years you needed it most. By 33, the number crossed $3 million, and something shifted in your head that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't done the math themselves. You realized you could stop. Not just should, could. By 34, you ran the numbers 11 different times, using 11 different worst-case scenarios before you believed it yourself. And then quietly, without telling a single soul, you gave notice at your job, citing personal reasons and wanting to explore something new. Nobody at that company ever knew the real reason, and more importantly, neither did your family. Here's a part most people don't understand from the outside. Hiding this isn't about ego, and it isn't really about privacy either. It's about something closer to fear. You've watched what happens to people in your extended family who come into money. A cousin who won a modest settlement and within 2 years had every relative in the family calling with a business idea, a medical bill, a temporary loan request that everyone quietly understood would never be repaid. You watch them go from generous to resentful to distant in the span of 18 months, not because he changed, but because everyone around him did. You've also watched what happens to people who retire early and announce it. The judgment isn't always hostile, but it's constant. Must be nice. What do you even do all day? Must have had help from your parents. Every conversation becomes in some small way about justifying a choice you made for yourself to people who feel entitled to an explanation you don't owe them. So, instead, you built a story, a flexible one, deliberately vague. You tell people you consult now, part-time, remotely, for a firm that doesn't require much explanation because nobody ever asks a second question. You mention a few clients if pressed. You never lie outright, not exactly. You just let people fill gaps with assumptions that are easier than the truth. Your parents think you have a job because you've never told them otherwise, and the assumption is easier to maintain than the conversation you'd have to have if you corrected it. Your siblings think you're doing fine, not amazing financially, because that's the story that requires the least follow-up. Your closest friend from college, the one person who might actually understand the math if you explained it, lives 4 states away now. And even with him, you've never said the real number out loud. You've built an entire second life, running parallel to the one everyone can see, and the maintenance of that second life has become, in its own strange way, a full-time job of its own. People imagine early retirement as endless freedom, but what they don't picture is the choreography. You wake up most days around 7, same as everyone else, because a 10 a.m. wake-up would be the first thing anyone noticed. You get dressed in something that could pass for going somewhere, even on days you're not going. You work out mid-morning at a gym where nobody asks what you do, because nobody at a gym ever does. You read. You manage the portfolio maybe 45 minutes tops, because a well-built portfolio doesn't actually need much daily attention, despite what you once assumed it would. You take calls from your family in the early evening, timed carefully to sound like you're stepping out of work to talk. The hardest part isn't the money management. It's the vocabulary. You've had to build an entire second language, vague enough to survive scrutiny, consistent enough that nobody catches a contradiction between what you told your mother in March and what you told your brother in June. You keep a mental list, sometimes an actual list, of which cover story you gave to whom, because the day those stories collide is the day everything unravels. Holidays are the hardest. Family gatherings mean hours of casual conversation, the kind where people ask, "So, how's work?" the way they'd ask about weather, not expecting a real answer, but expecting an answer, something plausible, something that fits the version of you they think they know. You've gotten good at it. Frighteningly good, if you're honest with yourself. But good at lying to the people you love most isn't a skill you're proud of. It's a skill you needed. The first time it almost broke was 8 months in. Your father needed help, a real financial problem, a medical bill that had spiraled past what his insurance covered, the kind of number that would have genuinely hurt someone living paycheck to paycheck. He didn't ask you directly. He mentioned it in passing, the way people do when they're hoping someone offers before they have to ask. You had the money, obviously. You had the money. Paying it wouldn't have made a dent in your accounts, but paying it easily, without hesitation, without needing to check your budget first, that would have raised a question you weren't ready to answer. So you did something you're still not entirely proud of. You told them you'd need a few weeks, that things were tight right now with a client project wrapping up, and you paid it in 2 installments instead of 1, spaced out just enough to look like it strained you. It didn't strain you. It cost you nothing. But the performance of struggle, the theater of "let me see what I can do," felt necessary in that moment, and you've replayed it in your head more times than you'd like to admit. That was the first time you understood, really understood, that the secret wasn't just information you were withholding. It was actively shaping decisions, relationships, even how you showed up for people you loved during moments that mattered. You told yourself it was temporary. You told yourself you'd find the right moment to explain everything. That was 3 years ago. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every family event became a small negotiation between the truth and the story. Your sister's wedding, you gave a generous gift, but not generous enough to seem strange for someone who consults part-time. Your nephew's college fund conversation, you offered advice, careful, deliberately hedged advice, instead of simply paying for it outright, which you could have done without noticing the withdrawal. You started noticing how much energy this took. Not the money. The money had stopped being a source of stress years ago. The energy went entirely into managing perception, into making sure the version of you that existed in your family's mind stayed consistent with the version of you that existed in your bank statements, even though those two versions had almost nothing to do with each other anymore. There's a specific kind of loneliness in this that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't lived it. You're surrounded by people who love you, genuinely, and none of them actually know you. Not the real shape of your life, not the actual decisions you've made, not the freedom you've quietly built. You're loved for a version of yourself that's increasingly fictional. And the strange part is, you're not lonely because you're hiding wealth. You're lonely because hiding the wealth has meant hiding almost everything that comes with it. Your actual daily rhythm, your actual priorities, your actual reasons for the choices you make. The lie isn't really about money. The money was just the first thread. Everything else got pulled along behind it. Then, 7 months ago, it almost fell apart completely. Your brother, going through his own financial stress, hired what he thought was a financial advisor recommended by a friend. That advisor, trying to build rapport, asked about family, and your brother, making conversation, mentioned you. My sibling's doing something similar actually, works in consulting. The advisor, it turned out, specialized in a niche corner of wealth management. And a few weeks later, at a family dinner you almost didn't attend, he was there too, invited by your brother, mentioning almost in passing that he loved working with people who had achieved early financial independence, and asking, with what felt like genuine curiosity, what firm you consulted for. Every eye at that table wasn't on you, not really, but it felt like they were. You had maybe 4 seconds to answer, and in those 4 seconds, an entire decade of careful architecture felt like it was about to collapse over a plate of your mother's cooking. You gave a vague answer, something about non-disclosure agreements, boring compliance requirements, the kind of answer that sounds tedious enough that nobody follows up. It worked. The conversation moved on. Nobody noticed your hands were shaking slightly under the table. But you drove home that night and sat in your own driveway for 20 minutes before going inside, replaying every version of what could have happened if he'd pushed even slightly harder. And for the first time in years, you asked yourself a question you'd been avoiding. What exactly are you protecting? And is it actually worth protecting anymore? Here's what nobody in this story ever puts into words, including you, until very recently. You didn't retire at 35 to hide. You retired at 35 to be free. Free of a job you didn't need, free of a schedule that wasn't yours, free of the assumption that your worth was tied to a title on a business card. But somewhere along the way, the secrecy itself became its own kind of cage, one you built carefully, brick by brick, without ever quite noticing you were sealing yourself inside it. The freedom is real, the money is real, but the isolation is real too. And it's a cost nobody talks about in the online communities that first inspired you, the ones full of spreadsheets and withdrawal rate calculations and success stories that always end at, "and then I retired." Never at, "and then I spent the next decade managing an elaborate, exhausting secret from the people I love most." Maybe the real ending to the story isn't a dramatic review at a family dinner. Maybe it's smaller than that, a single honest conversation, chosen deliberately instead of forced by an almost slip at a dinner table. Maybe it's deciding that the people who truly love you can handle the truth better than you've been giving them credit for. Or maybe you keep the secret a while longer. Maybe the fear is still bigger than the loneliness, at least for now. Either way, the choice, unlike almost everything else in this story, is finally, entirely yours to make now. Here's what I want you to sit with. Money doesn't just buy freedom, it buys choices, and some of those choices come with weights nobody warns you about before you make them. Retiring quietly at 35 sounds from the outside like the ultimate win, and in a lot of ways, it is. But every win has a shape, and this one's shape includes a parking lot, a lie about soup, and a decade of carefully managing what the people who love you are allowed to know. If you're chasing a number like this yourself, it's worth asking, honestly, not just how you'll get there, but what you're willing to give up once you do, and who you're willing to let in once you finally arrive. If this story hit differently than you expected, you know what to do. Subscribe, because next week we're telling another story most people will never say out loud. See you in the next one.